Hi geography students, this is week 6 and this is your first lesson video. We are still talking about the changes that happened in the world because of surplus production brought about by the Industrial Revolution and agriculture. So you should be working on your first project right now where you are researching a culture or an entire country that still uses the basic mechanized labor that was enabled by the Industrial Revolution. So when that innovation took place and those machines were created, they still needed a relatively high amount of manual labor to go into farming compared to what we do now, since we have these huge machines with, diesel, gas-powered machines that can 10 to 16 rows of crops at once, and we have all of these distribution channels. So there are still some societies on the planet that do it the old-fashioned way, so to speak, although that old-fashioned way brought about some huge changes all over the world. So we're going to look at some of those right now. And this topic, migration, comes from chapter 3. So that's the chapter that you should be looking at. However, I'm only going to pick out certain parts of chapter 3 at the moment. In my edition of the textbook that I use, I'm using edition 12, and I think the 11th edition does this also. It talks about like snowbirds. There's a word that you will see in chapter 3, early on in chapter 3. Snowbirds is used as like a stereotype of a person who is elderly, who lives in the north and likes the northern summers because they're temperate, but doesn't like the winters because they're too cold, and goes to cyclical migration, goes to a different location to live out the winters and transitions back and forth between those two spots. And so this is for luxury reasons, and so I'm going to skip that issue right now, and we will look back at that type of migration when we look at the cultural identity chapter later on in the semester. But for now, let's think agriculture. Let's think the massive changes that happened in the division of labor, or the different types of jobs that were necessary to run society, when it went from subsistence agricultural methods to surplus-driven agricultural methods. You saw a lot of migration. Now, one of the things that we're going to look at is the Colombian Exchange and the way that crops actually were exchanged from one place to the next, and in similar places in different parts of the world, different regions of the world. A crop that grew really well in South America, for instance, the potato, which is native to the Americas, grew really, really well in Ireland, for instance. And so there's some movement of crops from one place to the next brought about by the lowering of labor necessary in industrialized agriculture. When you don't need as many people working in industrialized agriculture, and you've got plenty of people working in factories, and you've got surplus production, you've got a whole lot of additional people in the population that can focus on other innovations, other parts of cultural development. So for instance, you had people who could focus on engineering ships, or focus on designing the steam engine, for instance, that helped transportation. Could focus on medical advancements. So you can look up the epidemiological transition model. You will find some similar graphics to the demographic transition model that I have showed you, that goes through 1 through 4, stage 1 through 4 of the demographic transition, and shows how death rates were affected by different types of diseases. So during the subsistence stage of agriculture, if there was a famine or a drought, then your death rate would go up a whole lot because you had food insecurity without a surplus production. With surplus production now, if there was or after the Industrial Revolution, you had transportation systems that could take food from one place to the next. And so you saw fewer and fewer deaths caused by that food insecurity, as we've mentioned. Also, since you have fewer people working in agriculture, agriculture, you can do medical innovations and medical research that can help you overcome those diseases like pesticides or, not pesticides, parasites. That's the word I was looking for. Parasites that brought people to an early death, or pestilence in general. You could focus on, germ theory and things like that, and learn how to quell disease spread in a population. And so that's what we see happening in that demographic transition stage 3 that we're kind of teetering on right now when we talk about migration. So migration in general is leaving a place permanently. When you see the word migration without an adjective in front of it, it's talking about leaving a place permanently for another location. So in your history class, when they talk about the Industrial Revolution and they talk about people leaving rural areas going into urban areas and urbanization taking place, they were talking about permanent migration. Now, there are 2 types of people that you can identify. Actually, when a person leaves or exits their country, I use the word exit here because immigrant with an E is you. If you are permanently leaving your original area, I've got the word country here, but if you are permanently leaving your area of origin to live elsewhere from now on, you are an immigrant with an E when you leave that country. There are immigration statistics that countries will keep record of now, where we can measure how many people are being lost in the population because of immigration with an E, rather than just the crude death rate that the demographic transition model shows. Please keep that in mind. When you're looking at population increase on the demographic transition model, you're only considering that crude birth rate and the crude death rate. But with agriculture, you see drastically different demographic trends being introduced because many people leave an area because of famine, because of drought, because of lack of work, because birth rates are still high, but work availability is low. And so they have to leave their original area permanently for someplace else. So when you leave, you immigrate with an E. When you enter the place, or when you go into the place, when you go into the place that you are going to live permanently, whatever country or area you choose to do that, you are an immigrant with an I. So incoming people, when you leave, when you leave Morocco and you go to Spain, for instance, across the Strait of Gibraltar, if you leave Morocco and you go to Spain, you are an immigrant with an E from Morocco, an immigrant with an IM to Spain when you enter and live there permanently. Okay. So you see this trend really change. So in the old subsistence agriculture kind of way, you saw really stable communities. You saw generational stability of families from one century to the next, staying in the same place, keeping to the same region, interacting with other villages within the same region. But with industrialized agriculture, that was blown out of the water. You see people having to leave. In some cases, we'll have a push factor or a pull factor we'll look at in the next video. You've already heard those terms from one of the videos that you had to watch in week 5, but you see a lot of immigration with an E for whatever reason, and you see people choosing specific places to go after they immigrate with an E based on the things that that particular place has to offer. A lot of times, economic reasons are the reasons for, or political strife. It could be a reason why people go from one place to the next. Now, there's also a type of migration called cyclical migration. I hope you can see that at the bottom of the screen here. Cyclical migration is a temporary form of a relocation. And we will look at that a lot with migrant workers, particularly agriculture migrant workers, because as we look at the different zones in the world where agriculture can happen year-round, if your job is in agriculture, you can't stay in Milwaukee, Wisconsin 12 months out of the year and have a job. That might be your home base. However, if you are an agricultural worker, there's going to be some transitions that you make. There's going to be some travel that you're doing to the different seasons where things are being grown. So you go to strawberry season here and peach season there and tomato season there and cabbage season there if we need you to harvest these things still by hand. Because there are some things like strawberries, like peaches, that we don't have huge, agricultural equipment that runs off diesel fuel to be able to harvest these things. And so we will look at some of those issues also, because there's more than just people who immigrate. There's a whole lot of supply chain stuff going on. And so we'll learn some terminology having to do with that Colombian Exchange. We call it Columbus because supposedly, he discovered the New World or something. I hope you noticed the sarcasm in my voice. But anyway, so we call it a Colombian Exchange, Old World to New World. There's a lot of movement going on. So we're going to be studying that this week and the reasons behind it. Text me with questions. Bye.